All right, are we on? I guess we'll get started here. Thanks everybody for joining, and if you're still in the room, have a seat. We're gonna get started with our next panel, how farmers can use technology to make financially sound decisions. And this panel is really gonna talk about, we're gonna have the panelists discuss some of the more economic or investment implications of introducing automation onto the farm. So I would like to first start by introducing the esteemed panel here. We'll start first with Connie Bowen, and then we'll move down the line to Jeff and Arthur. And I've asked each one of them to talk a little bit about their organizations as well, because I think from an investment standpoint, from a grower standpoint, they're doing some really interesting things. So Connie, kick us off.
Cool. Thanks, Seana. Hi, everyone. I'm Connie Bowen. You might have seen me 2 days ago. But I run Farmhand Ventures. We're a venture firm building and backing companies shaping the future of work in ag. So all I focus on is solutions for ag labor, really.
Great. My name is Jeff Morrison with Grimmway Farms / Cal Organic. We're a large diversified annual producer, year-round producer of carrots and organic leafy greens. We're based in the southern San Joaquin Valley in the Bakersfield area. We also have operations out in the southeast near Florida, Georgia. We have a summer season in Colorado and then a summer season up in the Pacific Northwest now. We started out with carrots, diversified into the organic space, grew into the leafy greens with an acquisition in the late 90s, and rode the explosion of organics. And my role at Grimmway is to develop technology mainly on the farm. So we're looking at automation, robotics, and certain information systems.
And Jeff, are you also kind of the filter for inbound innovation initiatives? And talk a little bit about your role in that capacity.
Sure. So we focus in a few different areas. One of them is internal development and R&D. So we have homegrown solutions, mechanical with some automation, and then also some information solutions. A lot of the information solutions have been rolled out into our IT group now. We're stronger in that area. And then we also work with a lot of startups, engage with VCs to a certain extent, and help drive the industry and understand what opportunities exist with ag tech also.
Great, thank you. And Arthur CHOW from S2G.
Great. Hi, everyone. My name is Arthur CHOW. I'm a vice president on the investments team at S2G. S2G stands for Seed to Growth, and we're really a multi-stage investment firm with a mission alignment to invest across the entire food system and really to promote planet health and human health. And so investing across the entire system, we can go from everything at the farm gate, ag inputs into the ground, biologics, robotics, to supply chain technologies in the middle with transparency, traceability solutions, and then finally to the consumer end with our brands, retail, restaurants. And looking at that holistic view, it's really about the food system at large and how can we connect the different pain points across the value chain. We'll invest multi-stage, so from seed and early and pre-revenue all the way to growth and really supporting a company through its life cycle. Our capital base comes from Builder's Vision, which is a family office founded by one of the Walton family members. We don't have any relationship to Walmart now, but he has a focus in mind really about long-term capital. And I think bringing solutions to these tough tech industries that when we're sure we'll hear it later today about venture capital and kind of a shorter view cycle. We take a lot longer viewpoint on how companies need to mature, and 10 plus years we'll invest in kind of really early stage cell-based and other types of sort of moonshot type of bets but those take time, and we're supportive along the entire way.
Great, thank you. All right, so let's dive in. Jeff, I'm going to start with you first, and just kind of level setting. I think a lot of companies get really wrapped up in the straight math of replacing labor. There's a labor shortage, we've got a cost problem, and we have an elegant solution to it. But really that can be a lot more nuanced decision on the operator side. So talk a little bit about that kind of business case development internally as you're evaluating these new technologies.
Sure, that's a great question. So when you look at all the opportunities we have to deploy technology across our operation, it varies greatly. There's a huge range of variables that influence the financial outcome of technology deployment. It could be a mechanical system, it could also be an information system. Our as I mentioned earlier, our production base varies across the U.S. and then also across the entire state of California on an annual basis, and our total cost of production for different products varies greatly across that footprint too. When we look at investments and returns on an investment, it really encompasses the total cost of production for that product. So we can look at it from terms of cost of production for a product, or maybe it doesn't necessarily influence the cost of production for a product, but it influences an overhead category, which influences cost of production over a range of products. So we'll do analysis differently for those different categories, but frequently when a system, so let's take a field-based system, as you work with systems in the field, they're going to go through a development cycle, and you could have product loss, crop damage, et cetera, along the way, shrink. We call it product shrink. And your net outcome has to take into a range of factors. It could be shrink. It could be the increased management skills, oversight, et cetera, that it takes to leverage that technology. There are a lot of things in play that we feel the startups really need to take into account when they analyze the entire total opportunity. So when we engage with startups, we want to help them understand that, help understand the economics, the total cost, and benefit to the grower or customer for that technology solution.
And Jeff, is it always about just the numbers, or is it about upskilling the existing force and some of the other, sort of maybe non-economic factors?
Yeah. So when we look at investments, it's not always a monetary thing. We're trying to improve working conditions for employees. It's a competitive. I always tell in startups, I say it's a competitive environment for capital, and if you want capital, you're going to have to compete for it. It's also a competitive environment for labor, and if we can improve working conditions, ergonomics, what we found is that it's much easier to access labor. They're happier, and they're more stable. It's a more stable labor supply. So it takes some of that risk out of your production cycle, takes some of the volatility, and helps flush some of that out. So it's a range of benefits. Some of those are tangible. The more economic side is very directly measurable and something you can quantify. And then you have the kind of the more soft benefits of labor and labor satisfaction. And those are still benefits to the outcome and strengthen the business.
So Arthur, sorry, go ahead.
Well, this is where I think there's kind of a tension sometimes between how startups have to communicate in venture capital fundraising land, which has to be we want a clear ROI that we can show on one slide that is ideally, miraculously short. But the problem is, one, it's always context specific. It's even different within different fields within the same operation. And then two, it's actually behavior drives a lot of these purchasing decisions. So this is something I try to look at a lot at Farmhand is I invest super early stage. So trying to think more about what really drives adoption. And that means talking to folks like Jeff, actually. That's the only way you can figure it out.
Yeah, great point, Connie. And Arthur, maybe I'll jump to you and say, when you hear about this and kind of the business case development from the grower's standpoint, how does that influence a fund like S2G's approach to, okay, at what stage do we want to invest in a company given the business case? What parts of the business case are you thinking about?
Yeah, I think ROI, certainly there's those two perspectives between the customer ROI and the company ROI. And I think the smarter ag tech investors and who have been in the space for a while know how long these adoption curves are and are paying attention to that. And that's the first, when you ask that question, you're first thinking about what is the customer ROI, because if it doesn't work, you can't make money off of it. And so you need somebody who actually wants to buy that themselves. And I think it's, when you look at kind of broader Silicon Valley, though, and I can say this because I'm in Chicago, so it's easier for me, but we have to talk to the customer. It's the most important point, I think, in the diligence process is those customer interviews and understanding where really the customer is driving value from that and are they going to buy more. I think if you're looking at software and enterprise SaaS, there's a lot of other metrics there that can point to that, and because it's easier to get revenue right away or to think about, it's cleaner to think about revenue and revenue retention, your annual recurring revenue growth, those are proxies that are sort of good enough to be able to say, customer wants this, and that's why it's easier in SaaS to not have, you can look at the metrics and not have to quite interview the customer. Here, you can't A/B test a crop. You don't have a bunch of coders to say, change this color on the Facebook page to make, this blue is going to get more eyeballs. And so that's I think the real big difference. You have to just listen to the grower and actually ask, how they think and feel about it.
Okay, let's stick on this ROI question because this is a finance panel. Connie, I'm going to direct this one to you, but we've talked about ROI and the operator ROI versus the startup ROI, and the math can differ greatly. And Jeff, I'm sure you have a few comments on this too. But talk a little bit about the sort of acceptable timeline to ROI and how that might vary by operation. It's going to vary by operation, like Jeff should definitely chime in on that, on the farm end. It's also going to vary by startup, and that's going to vary, and then also by how that startup is capitalized. And so I encourage early stage startups to be really thoughtful about how they're capitalized, because in most VCs funds, theoretically, you're trying to get a return in 5 to 7 years in most VC funds, but like in reality, everyone's actually 10 to 12 years. Personally, I structure a 12-year because I haven't seen really anything go much faster. So it's really important to understand how your capitalization and your board is driving how much of a rush you're in, really. And it varies, right? It depends on how much control you've given up, and I think if you're trying to go the attain liquidity for your equity investors route, then you're probably in kind of a rush. And you also probably are looking for an acquisition, which is something that probably doesn't serve, at the end of the day, some of your customers, actually. So a lot of what I focus on is like, how can we shift it a little bit so that we can have more companies who can actually take their time serving customers, actually figuring out all the different use cases, because certain operations are much more flexible on timeline to ROI, but then you've got kind of the more middle of the herd adopters who they need something that works right away, actually. They can't, farm operations that cannot afford to play with your crazy robot that maybe works. And so trying to build that capital stack that is aligned ultimately with the customer of the product, I think it's really important. And there's a couple different ways to structure it. You don't have to only take equity investment, but right now it is kind of the main option for startups. So you've got this tension where even I've talked to folks in this room here who are trying to go up to TechCrunch, Disrupt, and Bay Area right now because that's where all the venture capitalists are at right now. I'd argue your time's much better spent here, where your customers are. But also, if you don't have any capital, you can't build the robot. You can't even get it's a weird tension, and I think we need to get more patient capital into ag tech if we're going to actually solve problems. We'll stick around till the end of this panel because we're going to make sure that Connie talks more about what some of those alternatives look like. But Jeff, maybe I'll kick this one over to you and say from an operator standpoint, how do you guys think about, and one of scale, right? Obviously, Grimmway's of quite a bit of scale. So how do you think about this ROI and internal hurdle rate question?
Yeah, so we go through a capital planning process annually, as all businesses do. And we have maintenance capital, investment capital. And investment capital, typically our board is going to give us a timeline that classifies it as investment capital. And it may be a 4-year hurdle, or it may be earlier, maybe it may be longer. But that's how we look at things. That's a directive that comes down, and so then it's really just a nuts and bolts analysis of a system. We'll look at a system, and again, it can be total accrued delta and cost for a product or product category, or it could be for an overhead. And you're going to run those numbers against the capital. That has to take into account the total cost of production, so that's going to be all the labor changes, the staffing changes also. It's going to take into account depreciation, cost of capital, et cetera. So it's a full analysis. The thing I want to add is that when you look at our efforts with startups, what I just outlined really is the purchase model. So collaboration, co-development efforts, ROI doesn't really factor in at that point, because it's really how can we help somebody with promise develop? How can we gain insight, and how can they understand whether their effort has line of sight to returns? So at that point, we're not necessarily focused on returns. We're not really even looking at the economics. We're really just trying to see is it viable, and how can we support this effort to reach viability. So at that point, then it's a discussion, well, what's the business model look like? Actually, that discussion is going to happen earlier. And we have viewpoints on different business models, some that work for us, some that don't. Typically that, just by nature of our footprint and how we operate, a service model is a challenge, so it usually leads to a purchase business model. So then if the system shows promise, then it really comes down to pegging those returns and projecting that out across maybe a test region, and then how do you extrapolate that and understand what that means for an annual production cycle. It gets murky at that point because, like I mentioned, we do have a range of different cost structures across a 12-month cycle. So it's really it's a challenge, but you really don't know what you're dealing with until you get 12 months under your belt with a new system for us, because when we cycled through all of our production regions.
I hope the startups in the room are taking good notes, because there's a lot of detail in there that I think is important. But that sort of leads me to my next question, just around what are the growers' expectations for how much knowledge a company has around these financial questions? You know, how well do they need to understand the numbers of your operation, and how willing are growers to share that information?
It's my question.
Well, I'm going to sort of hit you two with both of that one.
Okay, I'll jump. Okay, so it varies, like everything. But one of the things I've been working on with Walt, actually at Western Growers, that is trying to help bridge this gap, because like we have to like step back and remember that fewer than 1% of Americans have like actual farm exposure. So like unless you were born into this industry, like you are gonna go to a farmer and ask a bunch of stupid questions, like assuming that like your U-pick or apple orchard is like how farming works, right? And so how do we bridge that gap? Like we need to get more information out there, and so we're building this ag tech toolkit, which we're trying to do all these different crop specific, just kind of lay the groundwork so that each grower can, you know, if you're an apple, we have a great apple page. We started this in collaboration with Washington Tree Fruit Research Commission too, but you know, if you're an apple producer and a startup hits you up to say, hey, I've saved the apple industry, will you talk to me? You can say, sure, but read this first. And listen to these 3 interviews that we had a couple of different apple growers talk about their numbers, and really just to get the sense of how varied they are. And then come talk to me. Because, you know, startup founders just want access to information for the most part. And so how do we make that research easy and accessible? Because, like, people don't even know about extension in tech world. So like, how can we get that out there to then make those conversations with growers more productive, and at least be able to ask the right questions and know what's sensitive versus what's not?
Anything to add to that?
Yeah, we engage with startups on a pretty regular basis. That they have an idea, their core is in tech. Connie brought up a great point. How many people day to day really spend time on a farm today? If you're not in the business, it's probably enigmatic, it's foreign, but it's what we do every day. So we can really help startups understand the economics or the total opportunity. Also, there are also frequently some assumptions in the maybe the objective of the technology that is going to break the model. So they need to understand that early on. It's you know, thing that surprises me frequently is that there are certain startups. They have an idea. They've already been funded to a certain extent, and sometimes we'll have conversations with some of their shareholders, some of their funders, the people that have funding, and they don't even understand certain things. So there's a disconnect between the capital side and the startups, and there's definitely work to be done to close that gap.
Arthur, I'm going to kick it over to you as the venture investor who might think about unit economics on the startup side a little bit differently. So how does your firm kind of approach that? And the unit economics of a prototype stage MVP company versus a scale-up company, what are some of the things that you're looking at? And again, sort of depth of understanding, it goes without saying, companies have really got to understand what's the BOM going to look like, what some of these economic drivers will look like, but how do you as an investor kind of parse that?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think because when you look at, again, that customer ROI versus the company ROI, there's only one input that's overlapping, and that's price. Otherwise, you're thinking very differently about what yield production and labor savings versus, for the company, it's bill of materials, maintenance and support costs, and hopefully at the earliest stage side, if you're producing a vehicle or producing a robot, you're at least kind of eking out neutral to a little bit positive gross margin on that, on the hardware. In the long run, if you're hopefully at scale, you're thinking more like 30-40% gross margin on the hardware, and hopefully there is some type of service recurring revenue component to that as well. And so it's, you have to kind of ignore sort of, I guess if you're offering on the RAS side, then you're looking at a payback period. And I know in farm equipment, I think 2 to 3 years is not bad, but that is an eternity in venture capital, where venture capitalists, again, going back to that enterprise SaaS example, they're looking at maybe a 12-month payback or less on their cost of acquisition, or CAC, cost to acquire a customer. And really, in the end of the day, their model is more focused on lifetime value to customer acquisition cost, or LTV to CAC. And that's when you're hopefully measuring at scale. You've got a robot out in the field. It's generating margin for you over a period of time. It might be a season or more, if you can kind of show and demonstrate that that robot is in the field each and every year or month at least. And then you compare that to when you have hopefully a scaled company, an efficient marketing sales machine, to acquire new customers, and you're just looking at that ratio. The magic number they say is 3 to 1. I think 3 or 5 to 1 would be ideal, but I can tell you that it's very rare in ag right now, and I think you have to look at that a little bit differently as an investor. That some of the lower metrics are okay as long as you're looking at the penetration overall, and are there more robots into the field, and ultimately our customers buying them more.
Boy, again, hope you guys are taking good notes. So that's great insight. Jeff, you mentioned something a few minutes ago regarding field trials, and I wonder for the growers in the audience, can you talk a little bit more about those integration costs and determining the true ROI? What advice would you give them if they're looking at maybe giving some of the companies at this event, try in the trial space? What would you tell them?
Yeah, I'd say that make sure you have your internal reporting systems up to date, and that your cost accounting systems function well. If you really have a command of your cost of production, then you're pretty well positioned to evaluate some of these things. Talking with some growers, it seems like a lot of growers struggle in that area. So it can misdirect the effort or the analysis if you don't have good data. So if you don't have good reporting systems and you really need to go granular, in some cases you're looking at maybe cost of production in a small region, so you're going to have to develop some replicated trials and so forth if you're really going to dive in and develop some insight. And it requires a lot of discipline, and it also requires the right staff. If you don't have the right staff, it's extremely difficult. So you have to invest in the staff. That's part of the overhead that really allows you to engage correctly with with all this technology. Traditional farm labor, traditional farm management, they may be up to par in that area, but they frequently aren't. So you're gonna have to find people who are really dedicated, who are disciplined, who really have a passion for the truth, because that's really what it's a search for. It's a search for understanding and truth. And once you have that process developed, then you need to deploy it across your operation, and then that gives you a better ability to evaluate whether it's a fit. But you have to understand the total cost. And the total cost, it involves shrink, it involves field impacts, it can involve impacts in the shed downstream, how you're handling product. and it often frequently doesn't end until our product reaches a customer. So if we put product in the customer's hand, they need to look at it. They need to understand whether they think it meets their customers' objectives. So when I say our customer, I'm talking about the markets, and that's really where it ends. So it's a full process. Starts in the field, it goes through harvest, goes through packing, and then distribution.
Great. As sort of a tee up to the next sort of group of questions I'm going to ask, I'm going to throw something a little bit abstract at each one of you, but hopefully you can roll along with me. What does technology for agriculture mean? And I ask this because sometimes it feels like we make it so hard. So Connie, tell us what you think about when you think.
Yeah, I love this question. And this is how you know I went to a liberal arts college. I took this course called Art and Technology, and like all we did was like debate. It was really a crunchy course. It was fun. But technology is very broadly defined as anything that advances the system, right? So like there's certain technology that is venture backable, but like, I don't know, barbed wire is a darn good example of super impactful technology. Like there's all sorts of things that are not sexy, but are super impactful. And the one thing I would tag on to that is like from just to how do you use technology to make financially sound decisions, actually operations and operational improvement is probably the most important component of that in the farm context. And I guess as like further context on that, I spend time with the Farmland Investment Fund and working on farms in Oregon too. So I've got some experience on that end of the thing. And if incentives are not aligned within the farming operation itself, I mean, technology is not going to solve your problem.
Yeah, technology. I love this question because at a time a shovel was technology. The scythe was technology. I mean, Connie brings up a great point. Barbed wire was transformative technology. People lamented the impact of barbed wire, but it also helped the industry develop discipline, help people control their products, cattle, etc., land. So it changed the whole dynamic. Cotton gin, that was technology. So we can go down the list. So what's technology now? Technology really, it leverages the ability to produce. I think that's probably the best way to sum it up. And technology will continue to change. It'll continue to advance. You come to an event like this, and technology is robotics. It's manipulation. It's vision. It's processing. That's just where we are now. But it will continue to develop, and the future is unknown. But we're moving towards a model where I think technology represents knowledge, insight, action, etc. And hopefully de-risking. That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to de-risk production and stabilize the cost of production in a volatile world.
Yeah, I think looking at technology all the time, venture capitalists, there's a lot of solutions out there looking for problems, and I think it's really about how do you improve either livelihoods, people, and processes. And so I think it's just being careful about asking that first question of like, what am I trying to solve for, as opposed to I want to build something cool, and hopefully, if I build it, they will come.
Arthur, I'm going to stick with you. Much of the conversation over the last couple of years has been around standardization, and I know we talked about this yesterday as well. And those foundational building blocks are needed to standardize. So as a venture investor, where do you think about, where the market is today in terms of investing in infrastructure versus investing in applications? Sort of where is this cycle?
That's a great question. I think especially when you compare across different industries, and ag is still, in my opinion, really early right now, and we're probably more on the application side because we need to prove it out. There's a lot of, you have to start in sort of a niche, an area to really make sure you're getting a solution that's working. And so in that prove it out phase, that's really more of an application. And in the end, what I often see is, maybe it's a symptom of Silicon Valley too, is that then you have to build some of that infrastructure around. And so if you wanted to just solve crop phenotyping, but how do you get your cameras and plants out in the field, or to actually get to the plant, then you have to build a navigation tool. You have to build potentially, other computer vision software that it takes a lot of disciplinary time and teams, and so you're sort of building this full stack to a degree to a robot. Hopefully, in the future, folks are thinking about the infrastructure side and the platforms. And there's a number out there now. Is how do you help bring other startup technologies that might be working on point solutions, because just working on dexterity and robotic arms is really, really hard. You can't focus on those other things. How can people partner and actually come together? I think that's hopefully when you start to see some of those point solutions take off, and really, I think on the weeding side is a great example. How do you then start to build infrastructure around it to help support those types of companies? And we're just really early in that.
Connie, I'm going to ask you the next one, and then I'm going to kick it back to Arthur again. But I think there's a tendency, in light of what he said and what you heard on maybe Tuesday, or you guys talked about on Tuesday, but to want to kind of build it yourself, build the full stack. And we're saying, hey, maybe, as investors, maybe there needs to be more standardization, or even growers in the space. But how then can companies convince investors that there's enough IP or enough of a technical moat to attract that capital if we're standardizing more of the stack?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I don't fully have the answer, but I'm thinking about it a lot. So there's two reasons I'm thinking about it. One is Mickey Siebel's sitting around here, but we manage the venture studio for the Vine, and we think a lot about how can we transfer technologies out of the UCs and actually make them commercially viable solutions. Oftentimes these transfer programs are just cookie cutter, how do you go the venture capital build a company route? And really, probably we should be looking at licensing and incorporating a lot of these things into the existing companies, because that just gives it, sometimes there's not someone who wants to run the company. Professors don't always make they want to continue their academic career. So I think that's a really under-tapped opportunity. But then also, what I'm trying to do at Farmhand is build this portfolio of companies that when normal VCs who aren't in ag look at it, they're going to say, what the heck, you're investing in a bunch of competitors. Because they look at agri-robots and they say, well, crop agnostic, so it works for everything. But I always say crop agnostic when someone says that, because I think we all know there's a really expensive, typically, development cycle to get into a new crop. So I think realistically, it starts with getting everyone in the same room and getting startups in the same room so they can see where there are collaboration points. And there's no cookie cutter answer, so it's going to be hard, but I think it's just an inherently relational thing. And I don't have the best answer, but.
Yeah, no, good insight.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I might flip it on its head a little bit, because I think if you're building tough tech and solving these hard challenges, inherently, hopefully there's going to be some IP and defensibility around that. Your algorithms within AI, the ability to detect that, and that you can even keep as trade secrets. The question I think investors, when they see that, then later are asking, what is the TAM then? If you're working on something sort of that point solution on robotic arms that might be really interesting for a certain crop, but then how do you scale it across crops? Potentially, and I think there's still a very big market in permanent crops, but for a lot of those investors asking, how big is that TAM really then?
Jeff, we talked yesterday about Grimmway's sort of relationship with the venture capital community, and I think you had some interesting insights around, how you think you could work in this sort of ecosystem and the role that growers can play.
Yeah, I think as a trifecta, I really think that there's an interesting opportunity for a large grower like Grimmway in the venture space to really help the startups, in the sense that we're unique in the sense that we plant and harvest 52 weeks of the year. We have a continuous development opportunity to cycle that process faster, and then we have the discipline and we have the process in place to help evaluate and establish the economics on some of these systems. And I think there's a lot of alignment across those three groups, in the sense that we can help clarify things for the investment side. We can also help accelerate the development cycle for the startups. And then it's a great opportunity for Grimmway too, because then we help drive access and we help drive early adoption amongst our own internal operations, and then we could potentially help establish a more rapid footprint in the marketplace for those startups. So I think there's, when I look at this, there's Arthur brings up some great points about IP. We're not in a position, we're not looking for IP, we're not looking for an equity stake in these things. We're really focused on our core business, and our core business is growing, harvesting, and shipping fresh veg. That's what we want to do. but at the same time, we want to access and we want to participate with the best technology companies out there. So the business for the investment side and for the startup, that's amongst the startup and the VC. But we think that the large growers can play a big role and help accelerate, make that process more efficient.
So I promised everybody that we'd circle back to Connie and some of the alternative sources of funding. And Connie, let's shape this in the framework of, what role growers can play with venture capital and maybe as funders, in the ecosystem.
Yeah, because I'll push on that too and say, like I said, these companies do need funding to get off the ground. They don't necessarily need tens of millions of dollars. They need some funding though. And the trick is to kind of align the capital that goes in with the TAM. And if you're only serving a fragment, we'll do kumquats like Rob Price likes to always do. But if you're only serving the kumquat market, then you better not raise too much money at too high of a valuation. And so I think we need to have a lot larger farms actually coming in with skin in the game. I think it's a pain to manage investments as someone who does it. But personally, I would way rather invest in a startup that has a couple of farms on their cap table early on, because it means that they're going to have field space to operate and break in, actually. That's really the thing that matters the most. But then also, if that's going to be true, we need to think about tweaking how mechanically capital works. So what I am trying to really push is redeemable equity, or more kind of revenue-based financing instruments. So what redeemable equity is say I buy 10% of your company with $1 million. We agree upon a pre-agreed upon multiplier, probably 3 to 5x, and you can actually buy back that equity from me over a period of time with a portion of your pre-agreed upon portion of your revenue. So I think this is a great thing for ag because it pushes companies to get to revenues. And it pushes them to, particularly in these cultivation service-based companies where you're going to have, honestly, a really terrible harvesting machine for a couple of years. But can you deliver a service to the farm? Maybe you've got crews on your team who are following the robot and cleaning up after it, and do so in a way that you're generating revenue, and at least you might not be profitable at all. That's why you need to raise money. But you're at least not fully bleeding money, and you've got someone who's paying for something, and you are working in the field with the customer every day instead of in a swanky lab in a city and just over-engineering a cool technology that shows up in the field and gets stuck in the mud immediately. So there's a bunch of different ways you can do these revenue or profit-based investment models, and we don't talk about them enough in this space.
Agreed, wholeheartedly. Arthur, from your standpoint, we know that robotics are going to be a capital-intensive business. As S2G thinks about the sort of capital allocator landscape, and obviously you're a large fund and very well connected in the industry and outside of the industry, how do you think about bringing in outside, funders from outside of ag who are hardware specialists, for example? How do you think about syndicating some of those investment partners also?
Yeah, I think the S2G mantra is really about how do we catalyze capital, and it's still a nascent sector, and really getting other folks interested in this, especially the generalist robotic investors and other Silicon Valley that may not be doing hardware right now. It really, I think first it starts with that education piece and just understanding what are some of the more characteristics that you have to expect and come to know in this space. We put a lot of content out there between blog posts and white papers and whatnot just to get folks educated. The honest answer at the end of the day, though, is exits. we need to show returns in this space and exits and other VCs who have invested and done well. Because the one thing that drives VCs more than anything else is FOMO, fear of missing out, and just if you look at sort of the venture portfolio and the mindset, usually across the portfolio, half of those companies will fail, go to zero. So you're expecting that one or two to hit that home run, the Ubers, the Googles of the world that will return your 10, 100x and sort of make up for the rest of that. So inherently, you're swinging for those home runs. You have to get aggressive in those growth projections, and that, I think to Connie's point, that is not always right for farming. You have to really think about your alignment with your investors, and are they taking a longer term view. But I think if we can start to show some exits in this space, and there have been a couple, we can really, that was what will just drive in all their investor interest, because they see that as a viable sector.
I have to chime in on one thing on that. It's like, just to like, numbers-wise, last year there were 33 exits in ag. 32 of them were via M&A. Average exit size was 118 million. And most VC portfolios, like Arthur said, are assuming even a higher than 50% fail rate, and aiming for, if you can't be $1 billion company, I don't want to put my money in you. And like, we had Climate Corp way back in the day that broke that, and like, that's it. And I don't think those exit pathways are serving, again, the customers. I think in this space we'll see roll-ups, which is another fun thing that John and I like to talk about. But I think there will be specialty crop roll-ups that can actually serve growers, but like we're far from that. And I like to talk about chickens and cows instead of unicorns in terms of like ag tech companies. You've got the companies that exit like sub 50, like around the 50 million mark that are chickens, and they don't take on that much money. Often they're almost bootstrapped. And those are great outcomes for founders oftentimes. And then you've got like the ones that bring in a corporate at the A or B round and then get acquired by a corporation for like 100 to 500 mil. And those are good outcomes for venture, actually. Those are really what most VCs in ag, I would say, are looking for. But like realistically, we don't have many unicorns in this space, nor will we, I don't think.
You can quote Connie or tweet Connie's chicken and cows reference there. Okay, great conversation, guys. I'm going to spend the last couple of minutes just opening it up for questions if we have any from the audience. No? No questions? I'm shocked. Oh, okay, here we go. Yes, front row. Yes.
I guess I'll just talk then. So the question I have is, so with the Taylor and Grimmway, do they have dedicated research plots that both universities and industry or startups could actually use to help subsidize some of that?
Sure. So we have, we don't necessarily have dedicated research plots where we're going to turn someone loose and say, this is your sandbox and go to town. That's not, we're not to that point. We've had the discussion that possibility exists, but what we're more focused on saying, this is a true production setting. You can come in and we're going to work together on this thing, and we're going to try this out in this true production setting and do something there. So if it's a UC extension, pure, just ultra raw early effort, I don't know if that's necessarily the stage that we're going to engage in at this point, but it could change in the future, but we're not there now.
I would say to like add a solution to that though, like there's a pipeline and there's different stages of trials that need to be run. So like there's the extension super early stage, then what the Vine is working on, and like Danny from the last panel at UC Merced, like these different universities have these kind of futuristic testy farms that are good for that stage. And ultimately, I think startups sometimes don't know when they're ready for which stage, particularly when they're not from ag world. So the Vine, if you're trying to go into California, is a really good resource to figure out what stage you fit in, because it's terrible to get thrown stuff that should be at extension stage and expecting to be in a commercial trial. Like that's not going to go well for anyone.
Yeah, it depends. I mean, we've had companies come out before and take some ultra, just bleeding edge, super early concepts and put it in a field. But I would say that effort, that test, when we've done those in the past, there's no mobility component. So it's a matter of you take something, you drop it in, you test it, you pull it out. So it's super low impact. They're gaining some knowledge. We're gaining knowledge too at the same time. But it's not really even an effort in a production type of application. So that can happen, but those don't happen very often.
I would still compliment you, Jeff, though, for that mindset of the innovative thinking, and really, that's where we see like the best customers have that patience with startups, where the first time you put a robot in the field, it will absolutely fail. Something will go wrong. And so having customers who are willing to say, okay, we know that it's not working right now, but if we help you, it'll work in the future. And I think that's really where VC can also help to partnership too with industry and folks like Jeff, and really understanding the growers that are, there's the middle adopters and late adopters and growers who aren't willing to take that risk. And then I think with Jeff, is probably more in a position to do that. And so just really how can VCs and industry partner together to shortchange some of those issues that we do have and the long cycle developments, especially if you're going from harvest season to harvest season. And it's awesome that, Jeff, you can plant 52 weeks out of a year. I know many robotic companies they're focused on this 3-month or 5-month window where they've got to reiterate their tech and prove it out. And it's across other industries. If you're like in inventory warehouse management, every single day product is moving through there, and you could fail 1 month, you can go on and test in the next warehouse and the next one, and it's not quite the same in ag.
Well, that's it. I think we're about out of time, but I would like to invite everybody to join me in thanking the esteemed panelists today. Great conversations. Thanks, guys.